Good morning. Day 4 of our read through of the Bible for 2019. Just to give you a quick recap, we left off at the end of chapter 11, where God had divided mankind into nations and languages. Particularly interesting is the breakup of the attempt to build a universal city at Babel. And so chapter 11 closed with a description of the godly line of Seth. The promise had been that there would be one from the seed of woman who would crush the serpent. We see the nations scattered, a focus on the godly line of Seth, which was narrowed down through the generations to Terah and then to Abram, living in Ur of the Chaldeans, which is in modern day Babylon. And so, Iraq rather. We get to chapter 12. We see this guy by the name of Abram. What we're finding is a wealthy person. You'll see at some point that when he needs to muster men from his household to go rescue his nephew, he has over 300 trained men who are part of his household. So they have wealth. This is a time around 2000 BC. So we're looking about 4,000 years ago, more or less. The pyramids had already been built by then. There was already established nations, codes of law. There were already established customs, trade routes, etc. And so it's a much more like our world type of environment than say what we might envision of Adam in the Garden of Eden. And so we'll get started. At the end, I'll do a quick recap and highlight some things that jump off the page. But it's significant because we see the narrowing of the focus of God's plan of redemption down to this one family, and a promise made in verse 3 of Genesis chapter 12 that is really the tie-in to the New Testament, the Christian faith. I say the tie-in. There's hundreds of tie-ins, but it's the one that is really the cornerstone. And so it's important for us to pay attention there. So chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, and Bethel on the west, and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram, name change hasn't happened yet, journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, "I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake." When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here's your wife, take her and go." And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord, and Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you, to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that no one can count the dust of the earth. Your offspring also can be counted." So if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also will be counted. "Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Chapter 14. In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim, these kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. All these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim and Ashtaroth, Karnaim, the Zumim in Ham, and the Emim in Shava Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their hill country of Seir as far as El Paran on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En-Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goam, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to their hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, with his possessions and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and of Aner. These were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all his possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Sheva, that is, the king's valley, And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out wine and bread. He was a priest of the Most High God, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. All right. So we've made a step 3 chapters into the portion of the book of Genesis that is tells the story of the patriarchs. And so we have chapters 1 through 11 tells really the story of creation, the division of the nations. Chapters 12 through 50 of the book of Genesis tell the story of the patriarchs, particularly Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And so a couple things to note. One, the promise in Genesis chapter 12 of the blessing of Abraham, and that in him all nations of the earth shall be blessed, all peoples. And so the question becomes, how is God going to bless all of the earth through this one guy, Abram, who is an ancient Near Eastern individual who was called from southern Iraq into modern day Israel, and had all these promises made to him, promises of land, promises of offspring, and promises of being used as a vessel of blessing to all the nations. Second, one thing that we hadn't talked about that I just thought was significant, I don't know why it even occurred to me while I was reading, but when we're reading chapters and verses, people will come along from time to time, particularly people who are into biblical numerology, which is an oxymoron because it's not biblical, and they'll try to draw analysis. They'll say, well, this has this many verses, or this has this many chapters, and if you go to these and draw these number of conclusions, you'll see a pattern, this, that, and the other. All of these books were written. Genesis was written by Moses. It was written as a text, without chapter divisions, without verse divisions. Those weren't added until a individual by the name of Nathan, who was a Jewish rabbi in the Old Testament. He added the Old Testament number and chapter divisions in the 15th century, so the 1400s. And so just understand that when we're reading, we're starting at the beginning of a chapter, we're ending at the end of a chapter. Chapter divisions are not, nobody's ever claimed them, at least we shouldn't claim them, to be inspired. And so you'll see sometimes where it might actually even make sense to read into another chapter, that we have sections of, where it's broken down by thoughts that are referred to as pericopes. It's just easier to stop at the end of a chapter. So for instance, this was a good example where the story of Abram really might better begin in the end of chapter 11, and because that really flows into chapter 12. It's kind of inconvenient the way that it's divided, but frankly, for our studying and for our planning purposes, it's easier just to say, well, we're going to read this chapter through this chapter. So that's why we do that. Lot is Abram's nephew. If you didn't pick that up from chapter 11, Abram cares about Lot. They have enough wealth that they have to divide themselves because they have too many people in too close proximity. 4 kings go to battle against 5. The kings steal the people of Sodom, take a lot of their possessions, and they take Lot. Abram's able to get 300 trained men who were born in his household, which gives you just a glimpse of the vastness of his wealth, and goes after them. Is able to recover his nephew, take some of the spoils back, divide them among those who helped him. He refused to take any himself. Even the kings who offered to pay him and bless him for what he had done, he says, I don't want anybody saying that anybody made me rich. I don't want the people of this land to claim any credit for the prosperity that God gives me. So I think there's significance there. One more thing, it slipped my mind. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I'm not going to sit here on video all day trying to remember it. That was worth. Melchizedek, this odd priest that comes up at the end. It says he's a priest to the Most High God, which is odd because there weren't many worshipers of the Most High God at that time. There were a number of religious practices and beliefs that had sprung up, but this idea of a one God, creator, etc., was not. It was odd for him to find such a person. The significance of this guy Melchizedek is not only is he a priest, he's also a king, which is why in the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, Jesus is described as a priest after the order of Melchizedek. We could talk about him for a long time. There's lots of interesting speculation about who he is, what he did, and why. The significance is Abram obviously recognized him as a servant of God and actually gave a tenth of his belongings to Melchizedek. And so that's really all I got for this morning. I'm probably going to post some comments later once I digest this a little bit. But any questions, comments you guys have, let us know. Thanks.